Maya Johnson never expected that handing back a stranger's wallet would end with her own face staring up from a 20-year-old photograph and a man's voice cracking, "You're the baby I thought died." Honestly, who writes this stuff? Because if they did, they'd be hailed as a genius, and Maya was just trying to get through another Tuesday night shift, utterly oblivious that her entire universe was about to tilt on its axis, courtesy of a forgotten billfold and a faded picture. Maya's 23, right? 23, adopted, and basically living on the fumes of hope and the scent of stale coffee. Her life was a masterclass in scraping by a constant tightrope walk between paying the bills and affording, say, an actual meal that wasn't leftover diner fries. She worked at this beach town diner, a place where the coffee was always burnt. A culinary mystery, really, how they managed it every single time. And the rent was always late. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers, a gritty, honest existence. She carried a secret, though tucked away not just in her heart, but in a worn, spiral-bound notebook she kept hidden beneath her mattress. It was filled with questions, a whole encyclopedia of them all addressed to the birth parents she'd never met. What time was I born? Did I cry right away, or was I one of those quiet, observant babies? Do I look like you? Do I have your laugh, your temper? The questions piled up, each one a tiny, desperate plea for connection, for understanding. Answers never came, of course. But the questions, those relentless whispered inquiries, they kept her awake far longer than any espresso she served, far longer than the clatter of late-night dishes or the distant murmur of the ocean. They were the background music to her entire life. Tonight, like so many other nights, she was on closing duty. The diner was finally empty, the last lingering scent of lukewarm coffee and forgotten dreams hanging in the air. She moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, wiping ketchup ghosts off sticky tables, stacking chairs, her mind half on her aching feet, half on the stack of bills waiting at home. Just as she reached for the last booth, the one tucked away in the back where couples often snuck kisses and teenagers carved initials, something caught her eye. A glint of dark leather wedged deep behind a ripped cushion. A wallet. Her first thought was a sigh. Great, another chore. She picked it up, feeling its weight, and flipped it open, her fingers automatically searching for an ID. Standard procedure, right? Find the owner, return the wallet, maybe get a small thank you, or, if she was lucky, a few extra bucks for her troubles. But then she froze. Her breath caught in her throat, a little gasp that no one was around to hear. Inside, nestled in a plastic sleeve, sat a faded photograph. It was old, clearly. The kind of picture that had been carried around, touched, looked at 1,000 times. A newborn swaddled tight in a hospital blanket, a tiny white cap perched precariously on its head, and the infant's face. Round cheeks, a little button nose, and there it was unmistakable, a dimple in the left cheek. It wasn't just a resemblance, it was uncanny. This baby, this tiny, vulnerable human, could have been her own baby picture. The shock hit her like a physical blow, a jolt of electricity that ran right through her. Her heart, usually so steady in the face of diner chaos, began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of disbelief and dawning realization. She forced herself to look away from the photo, her eyes scanning the license next to it. David Arthur Halbrook, CEO, Halbrook Maritime. The name was big, the title even bigger. A wealthy man, clearly. This wasn't some local who'd forgotten his lunch money. This was someone important. But the name, the status, it all faded into the background, overshadowed by the impossible coincidence staring back at her from the photograph. Her hand almost unconsciously went to her own neck. There, nestled against her collarbone, was the same tiny silver moon charm that hung around the baby's neck in the photo. Identical. Utterly, perfectly identical. She hadn't taken it off since the day she'd received it, a small solitary gift from the orphanage 18 years ago. A silent promise of a past she couldn't remember. It was her one constant, her only tangible link to a history that felt like a gaping hole. Now, suddenly, impossibly, that link had just found a reflection. The world, which moments ago had been mundane and predictable, had just cracked wide open. Her heart hammered even harder, a wild thing trapped in her chest. This wasn't just a lost wallet anymore. This was a message. The wallet was heavy in her hands, not just with leather and plastic, but with the sheer weight of possibility. She peeked inside the cash compartment. Over $2,000. $2,000. An insane, dizzying amount of money for someone like Maya. She could keep it. The thought, fleeting but potent, flashed through her mind. It wasn't like anyone would know. She could pay her overdue rent. Finally silence the landlord's increasingly aggressive voicemails. She could fix the transmission in her beat-up old car, the one that had been coughing and sputtering like a dying beast since Easter, threatening to strand her miles from anywhere. She could buy groceries that weren't ramen and day-old bread. She could breathe just for a little while. The temptation was a siren song, sweet and alluring. But then she looked at the faded photograph again, at the innocent, dimpled face that could have been her own, at the silver moon charm glinting faintly in the diner's dim light. And the temptation, as quickly as it had come, evaporated. It wasn't even a real choice, not for her. Honesty wasn't just a virtue, it was a reflex, a core part of who she was, especially after a lifetime of feeling like she had nothing but her integrity to call her own. She wouldn't keep it. It felt wrong, like stealing a piece of her own destiny. Her fingers, still trembling slightly, found the emergency contact number on the license. With a deep, shaky breath, she dialed. The phone rang twice, then a crisp, professional voice answered. David's assistant. Maya explained, her voice surprisingly steady, that she'd found Mr. Halbrook's wallet. The assistant, a woman named Sarah, let out an audible sigh of relief that vibrated through the phone line. Oh, thank goodness. The boss has been frantic. He's been tearing the city apart. Sarah sounded genuinely relieved, almost giddy. He's offering a substantial reward, of course. Can you bring it to his office first thing in the morning? Maya paused. Morning was hours away, and she had a plan, forming a risky, audacious plan that felt both terrifying and utterly necessary. She needed to see his face. She needed to gauge his reaction. Actually, she said, her voice a little softer now, my shift ends at 2 a.m. I can bring it by then if he's still up. It's important. She didn't mention the photo. Not yet. She needed to see his face when he noticed the necklace, when he made the connection. That moment, she instinctively knew, couldn't be explained over the phone. It had to unfold in person, raw and unfiltered. The anticipation was a knot in her stomach, a mixture of fear and an almost unbearable hope. The next few hours, as she finished her closing duties, felt like an eternity, each tick of the diner clock amplifying the nervous flutter in her chest. The air outside the diner at 2 a.m. was thick with the scent of salt and damp sand, a cool, quiet contrast to the lingering grease and coffee fumes inside. Maya hugged her worn jacket tighter, the wallet clutched in her hand, its presence a burning weight. She stood by the curb, the neon glow of the diner sign casting long, flickering shadows, and waited. Her nerves were frayed, stretched taut like violin strings. What if he didn't show? What if she was wrong? What if this was all just a wild, painful coincidence? Then a sleek, dark sedan pulled up its headlights, cutting through the fog. It was the kind of car that screamed money, the kind Maya usually only saw in magazines. A man emerged from the driver's side, tall and impeccably dressed, even at this ungodly hour. Charcoal suit, salt and pepper hair that was indeed damp, clinging slightly to his forehead from the ocean fog. David Arthur Halbrook. He looked tired, his face etched with worry, but there was an undeniable aura of authority about him. He was exactly as she'd pictured him, a man used to getting what he wanted, used to controlling his world. But tonight, it was clear his world had spun out of his control. He approached her, his eyes scanning her face, a mixture of relief and impatience in his gaze. "You found it?" he stated, his voice deep, a little rough with exhaustion. "Thank you truly. My assistant told me you insisted on bringing it tonight. I'm incredibly grateful." He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. "Here for your trouble, a small token of my appreciation." He held it out, and Maya could tell from its heft that it was more than just a small token. It was thick, substantial enough to solve her next 3 months of financial woes, probably more. Maya shook her head, pushing her hands deeper into her pockets. "No, thank you, Mr. Halbrook," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I just wanted to return it." She wasn't looking for charity, not now, not ever. She was looking for something far more valuable, something she couldn't put a price on. She wanted honesty. She wanted answers. And she knew deep down that taking a reward would somehow cheapen the moment she was about to orchestrate the truth she hoped to uncover. As she spoke, the movement of her hand rejecting the envelope caused her apron to shift slightly, revealing the tiny silver moon charm nestled at her throat. It gleamed faintly under the streetlights. David's eyes, which had been focused on her face, dropped to her neck, and then slowly they widened, like he'd seen a ghost, just as she'd imagined. The weariness in his expression was replaced by something else entirely, a flicker of recognition, then shock, then a raw, piercing anguish that made her own breath catch. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just stared, his gaze fixed on the charm, then back to her face, then back to the charm again. His hand almost involuntarily went to his own wallet, which he'd just retrieved from her. He flipped it open, his thumb tracing the faded photograph inside the one she knew so well now. He looked at the picture, then back at her, his jaw slack, his face pale. The silence stretched heavy and charged, punctuated only by the distant crash of waves. Finally, his voice came a mere whisper, rough with emotion. Where did you get that necklace?" His eyes were pleading, desperate, searching her face for an answer that could either shatter him or save him. Maya met his gaze, her own heart thundering. This was it, the moment of truth. "I've always had it," she replied, her voice soft but clear, imbued with all the years of unanswered questions, all the longing for a past she couldn't grasp. Since the orphanage, the night air, already cool and damp, suddenly felt impossibly heavy, thick with unspoken history. It was as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for the pieces of a long-lost puzzle to finally click into place. The ground beneath her feet felt less solid, the world around them blurring into an insignificant backdrop for this single monumental encounter. David didn't hesitate. He gently, almost reverently took her arm, his grip surprisingly firm, and guided her across the street. The diner was a beacon of artificial light and familiar smells. The all-night cafe they entered was a hushed, dimly lit haven of quiet desperation and lukewarm coffee. He led her to a secluded booth in the back, the red vinyl cracked and worn, and ordered 2 hot cocos. Maya sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, still trembling a tremor that ran deep into her bones. The cocoa arrived steaming and sweet, but she couldn't bring herself to touch it. Her throat was tight, her stomach a tangled knot of anticipation and dread. David, however, seemed to find a strange comfort in the warmth of the mug, though he barely drank from it either. He stared into the swirling chocolate, his gaze distant, lost in a past that was suddenly painfully present. He began to speak, his voice raspy, hesitant at first, then gaining a somber momentum. 23 years ago, he started, his eyes meeting hers, full of an ancient sorrow. My wife, Emily, died giving birth to our only child. His voice cracked on his wife's name, a raw wound that had clearly never truly healed. It was devastating. I was lost, completely shattered. I couldn't cope. Not with the baby, not with anything. He paused, taking a ragged breath. In my grief, in my utter despair, I made a decision. I've regretted every single day since. I placed our baby girl in temporary care, just for a few weeks, I told myself. Just until I could pull myself together, until I could function again. I was traveling for work, a new business venture, and I thought it would be best for her, for both of us. He recounted the tragic sequence of events, a bureaucratic nightmare that had spiraled into a personal hell, a clerical error, a misplaced form, a name misspelled, then a fire, a devastating blaze that swept through the records office of the agency, incinerating files, erasing paper trails, destroying any tangible proof of her existence. And as if fate wasn't cruel enough, a shady attorney, an opportunist who preyed on the vulnerable, who saw a chance to make a quick profit by declaring the infant deceased, perhaps to avoid further legal complications or simply to close a file with minimal fuss. By the time David, emerging from his fog of grief, finally hired investigators desperate to bring his daughter home, the agency had declared the infant deceased due to failure to thrive. Failure to thrive. He repeated the words laced with bitter disbelief. My daughter. They told me she just faded away. I buried an empty coffin, Maya. An empty coffin because there was nothing else. No body, no grave, just a lie. His voice was thick with emotion, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. But I never stopped wearing her photo. Never. I swore I'd never forget her, even if the world decided she never existed. He reached into his wallet again, pulling out the faded picture, holding it up, the tiny moon charm on the baby's neck, a beacon of hope in a sea of despair. Maya listened, silent tears, streaking mascara she couldn't afford to replace, couldn't even think about replacing right now. Each word was a punch to the gut, a revelation that both explained everything and shattered her world anew. She thought of her own childhood moving through the system, the endless cycle of foster homes, and the sterile, impersonal environment of the orphanage. She thought of the questions in her notebook, questions that had festered for years, always wondering why no one came for her, why she was left behind. Now she knew. She wasn't abandoned. She was lost, stolen, erased. They sat in silence. Then the cocoa, long gone cold. The only sound, the soft clinking of distant dishes, and the quiet hum of the cafe's refrigerator. Dawn A pale, hesitant light began to creep through the windows, painting the edges of their shared grief with a fragile new hope. The story had spilled out raw and painful, filling the vast empty spaces of Maya's past with a truth more devastating and more wonderful than she could have ever imagined. The next morning, a whirlwind of legal appointments and urgent phone calls, David booked a DNA test. Not just any test, but a highly reputable, legally binding one. He wanted certainty, absolute, undeniable proof. For Maya, the waiting week that followed was an exquisite form of torture. Every minute felt stretched, elongated, filled with a torturous blend of hope and terror. She went through the motions at the diner, a ghost in her own life. She served pancakes, poured coffee, her hands moving on autopilot, offering smiles that felt brittle and fake, plastered on for the benefit of unsuspecting customers. Her mind, however, was miles away, replaying David's story, dissecting every word, every detail, trying to reconcile the horrific past with the incredible present. Was it real? Could it truly be? David, for his part, was equally consumed. He checked his phone obsessively, every ping, every notification sending a jolt of adrenaline through him. He was a man accustomed to control, to making things happen, but now he was utterly powerless, at the mercy of a lab and a timeline that felt impossibly slow. The weight of his past, the decades of buried grief, hung heavy in the air between them, a silent shared burden. Her co-workers, ever observant, noticed her distraction. Her tips, usually her lifeline, dropped significantly. She barely registered it. The mundane concerns of her old life, the late rent, the broken car, the burnt coffee, they all seemed utterly trivial now, distant echoes in a world that had suddenly become intensely focused on one single monumental question. She was balancing precariously on a knife edge, teetering between the exhilarating peak of hope and the terrifying abyss of terror. What if the test results came back negative? What if this incredible, impossible connection, this fragile thread of destiny, was just a cruel twist of fate, a heartbreaking coincidence? What if this dash, the only shot she had ever had at answers, at belonging, at understanding who she truly was? The thought was a cold, sharp fear that gnawed at her, threatening to consume the fragile hope that had just begun to bloom. She tried to tell herself to be cautious, to manage her expectations, but her heart, foolish and defiant, had already started to believe. The email landed on a rainy afternoon, the kind of day where the sky seemed to weep along with the human heart. Maya was alone in her tiny apartment, the muted light filtering through the window pane, reflecting the gray mood outside. Her phone buzzed, a sharp, insistent sound that shattered the quiet. Her breath hitched. This was it. The email she'd been dreading and longing for with equal intensity. The subject line was stark, clinical DNA paternity test results, case number Halbrook Johnson. Her fingers trembled so violently, she almost dropped the phone. She took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to calm the frantic hammering in her chest. With a slow, deliberate movement, she tapped open the email. Her eyes scanned the text, blurring slightly, until they landed on the crucial line, the one that held the answer to a lifetime of questions. Probability of paternity, 99.9997%. 99.9997%. It wasn't just a number. It was a thunderclap, a seismic shift that resonated through every cell of her being. It was certainty. It was truth. It was an undeniable, irrefutable affirmation of what her heart had already whispered. She wasn't lost anymore. She was found. Without a second thought, without even pausing to process the enormity of the news, Maya grabbed her keys. She had to tell him. She had to. The rain was coming down in sheets now, but she barely noticed driving through the downpour, her old car sputtering but miraculously holding together, propelled by a force far greater than its ailing engine. She headed straight for the Marina, a place she now knew was a sanctuary for David, a place where he often sought solace among his boats. She found him standing alone on the deck of his magnificent sailboat, the Emily Rose, its name a poignant echo of his lost love. He was staring out at the churning gray water, his collar turned up against the biting wind, a solitary figure consumed by a quiet despair. He looked utterly defeated, lost in his own world of past regrets and uncertain futures. Maya didn't speak. She couldn't. Her throat was too tight, choked with a lifetime of unshed tears and the overwhelming surge of emotion. She simply walked up to him, her footsteps soft against the wet deck, and held out the printed sheet of paper, the one bearing the scientific proof of their connection. David turned his eyes, still distant, then focused on the paper in her outstretched hand. He took it, his fingers brushing hers, and his gaze dropped to the text. As he read, his mouth began to tremble, his eyes widening with each word, with each digit of the percentage. The defeat drained from his face, replaced by a dawning, incredulous joy, a fragile hope blossoming into vibrant certainty. He looked up at her, his eyes brimming a profound, almost primal recognition shining in them. Then, without another word, he simply folded her into his arms. It was a hug she had waited a lifetime to feel, a hug that was both an apology and a promise, a reunion and a beginning. It was fierce and tender, a torrent of unspoken emotions finally released. Salt water mixed with the rain on her cheeks, warm tears mingling with the cold drops from the sky. She couldn't tell which was which, didn't care. All she knew was the solid warmth of his embrace, the rhythmic thump of his heart against hers, and the profound, undeniable sense of finally, irrevocably being home. The embrace on the sailboat lasted what felt like an eternity, a lifetime, compressed into a single profound moment. When they finally pulled apart, both their faces were streaked with tears, but their eyes held a light that hadn't been there before, a light of shared understanding, of rediscovered connection. The rain had softened as if the heavens themselves had acknowledged their reunion. David led her away from the Marina, not back to his grand house, but to a small, unassuming apartment he kept downtown. It was a place Maya hadn't known existed, a private sanctuary, a testament to his enduring grief and his unwavering hope. As he opened the door, she stepped inside and gasped. The walls weren't decorated with modern art or expensive tapestries. They were covered every inch with yearly age progression sketches. Commissioned from forensic artists, each drawing depicted a girl growing older, year by year, from a toddler to a teenager, then to a young woman in her early 20s. And each drawing, impossibly hauntingly, looked like her. Her school photos, her teenage selfies, her current reflection. They were all there, captured in charcoal and pastel, a silent, desperate prayer that she was still out there somewhere. It was a museum of sorrow, yes, but also a monument to a father's relentless love. Maya traced the outline of a teenage face, her own face on one of the sketches, tears streaming down her cheeks again. But these were different tears. Tears of profound, overwhelming gratitude. She saw herself not as a lost orphan, but as a cherished daughter, whose memory had been kept alive, nurtured in secret for decades. David stood beside her, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Maya," he whispered, his hand gently touching her shoulder. "For every birthday I missed, every scraped knee I couldn't kiss better, every school play, every graduation, every single moment I wasn't there." His apologies were heartfelt, raw, carrying the weight of 23 years of absence. Maya finally cried without shame, without restraint. It was a catharsis, a release of all the pent-up loneliness, all the unanswered questions, all the silent longing that had defined her life. She wept for the girl in the sketches, for the man who had drawn them, and for the incredible, improbable miracle that had brought them together. They spent the rest of the night, and indeed the entire next day, simply talking. They spoke until their voices were hoarse, until their eyes burned with fatigue, terrified of wasting another minute, another second of the precious time they had been given back. He learned she loved old jazz, the kind that made you feel like you were stepping back in time, and that she hated olives with a passion, a small, endearing quirk. He discovered she fell asleep during black and white movies, a habit she'd picked up from late nights in the orphanage, finding comfort in the flickering images. And she learned about him, that he had never remarried, never even truly looked at another woman, his heart permanently etched with Emily's memory and a silent vow to his lost daughter. He had never stopped believing she was alive, a tiny, stubborn ember of hope that had somehow survived the crushing weight of grief and official declarations. They shared stories big and small, piecing together the fractured narrative of their lives, stitching the gaps with laughter and tears, with the profound understanding that only true family can share. It was a slow, deliberate, beautiful process of rediscovery, a conversation that felt like coming home. The following week, David, a man known for his calculated moves and strategic decisions in the cutthroat world of maritime business, made an announcement that sent ripples of shock and awe through his company. He invited Maya to the annual board meeting, a highly anticipated event where nervous executives usually expected the unveiling of a new product line, a major acquisition, or a shift in market strategy. Instead, they met Maya. She walked in beside David, feeling a strange mix of apprehension and pride. She was dressed in a simple but elegant dress David had insisted on buying for her, a stark contrast to her usual diner uniform. Her knees felt weak, a familiar flutter of nerves in her stomach, but she held her head high, drawing strength from David's steady presence beside her. The room, filled with sharp-suited, serious faces, fell silent as David took his place at the head of the polished mahogany table. He cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping over the assembled executives. "Gentlemen, ladies," he began, his voice clear and resonant, but with a slight, unmistakable tremor that Maya recognized as deeply personal. "Today, I'm not here to discuss quarterly profits or market projections. Today I'm here to introduce you to my future." He paused, his eyes finding Maya's a profound well of emotion in their depths. 23 years ago, I lost my daughter, Emily Rose Halbrook, to a tragic error. For decades, I believed she was gone. He took a deep breath, and then, his voice cracking with raw, unvarnished emotion, he said, "But today I stand before you to tell you that the daughter who was dead now lives." He gestured to Maya, a proud, triumphant smile spreading across his face. "This is Maya Johnson, my daughter, my heir apparent." A stunned silence filled the room, quickly followed by a low murmur, then a wave of applause that swelled into a standing ovation. Phones were discreetly pulled out, recording the astonishing moment. Maya felt a dizzying rush. It was overwhelming, surreal. She thought of every diner guest who had ever snapped their fingers for a refill, every landlord who had lectured her on late fees, every moment of struggle and indignity she had endured. She didn't gloat, not outwardly, but inside a quiet, fierce satisfaction bloomed. This wasn't about revenge or showing them up. It was about validation. It was about breathing, finally truly breathing, and feeling utterly, completely safe for the very first time in her life. The applause was deafening, a symphony of recognition and acceptance. Her knees still felt weak, but she stood tall, a testament to resilience, a living embodiment of a miracle. The next day, under a sky that seemed to hold a promise of brighter days. David took Maya to a quiet, secluded corner of a beautiful old cemetery overlooking the ocean. It was a place she hadn't known existed, a place David had visited countless times, a private pilgrimage of enduring grief. There, nestled beneath a sprawling oak tree, was a small, unassuming plot. He knelt, his movements slow and deliberate, and gently brushed away the moss and fallen leaves from a simple, elegant stone. Engraved upon it were the words, Emily Rose Halbrook, his wife's name, his daughter's chosen name, the name he had given her, the name he had mourned. It was a poignant, heartbreaking moment. This was the physical manifestation of his long-held sorrow, the place where he had come to grieve the child he believed he had lost forever. Maya stood beside him, a silent sentinel, her heart aching for the decades of pain he had carried. Then, with a gentle, almost sacred gesture, Maya unclasped the tiny silver moon charm from around her neck. Her constant companion, her only tangible link to her unknown past, now held a new meaning. She placed it carefully on the mossy ground beside the stone, a silent offering. It was a powerful symbolic act. It wasn't about forgetting the past, not at all. It was about acknowledging it, honoring it, but also letting go of the chains it had forged. The past was real, undeniably so, but it no longer held them captive. It was a foundation, not a prison. Together they planted lilies, her birth mother's favorite flower, their white petals a stark, beautiful contrast against the rich, dark soil. As they worked, their hands moving in a quiet, shared ritual, David whispered words of thanks, a hushed gratitude for the life that had somehow miraculously survived bureaucracy and grief, surviving against all odds. Maya joined him, her own silent thanks echoing his, a profound sense of peace settling over her. The air felt lighter, the burden lifted. It was a moment of profound closure, a beautiful, bittersweet goodbye to a painful past, and a hopeful hello to a shared future. David, ever the man of grand gestures and profound sentiment, had one more place to show Maya. It was a small, charming beach cottage nestled among the dunes not far from the diner where her old life had played out. This wasn't just any cottage. It was the home her mother Emily had decorated before giving birth. Stepping inside was like stepping into a time capsule. Yellowed wallpaper, faded floral patterns still vibrant in their memory, a vintage crib carefully preserved in a sunlit corner, tiny clothes lovingly folded, never worn. It was a sanctuary of what-ifs, a poignant shrine to a future that had been stolen. For a moment, Maya felt a wave of sadness, the weight of the lost years pressing down on her. It could have been her nursery, her childhood bedroom. But then a new thought emerged, a brighter one. This wasn't just a museum of sorrow, it could be something more. They walked through the rooms, David pointing out little details, memories of Emily, of their plans. I kept it, he explained, his voice soft, because I couldn't bear to let it go. It was a piece of her, a piece of what we had hoped for. Maya looked at him, then back at the tiny crib. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice filled with a quiet strength. "But it doesn't have to be a museum, does it? It could be a guest room. For future grandkids, maybe?" The suggestion hung in the air, a bold, hopeful vision that transformed the space instantly. David's eyes widened, then filled with a joyous light. The weight of the past, so heavy in this room, began to dissipate, replaced by the exhilarating lightness of possibility. And so their new chapter began, not with a sudden erasure of the past, but with a deliberate, loving reinterpretation of it. Maya, ever practical and driven, enrolled in night classes for business management. She wasn't content to simply inherit. She wanted to understand, to contribute, to build. David naturally insisted on paying for everything, wanting to shower her with the opportunities she'd been denied. But Maya, fierce in her independence, insisted on taking out loans with interest, promising to pay him back. Compromise, they quickly discovered, became their own unique love language. A delicate dance between his desire to give and her need to earn, a testament to their budding relationship, built on respect, love, and a shared understanding of what it meant to fight for what you believed in. Pause if you've ever felt lost, if you've ever clung to a sliver of hope against all odds. Type "I believe in second chances" in the comments so Maya can see she's not alone in hoping, because sometimes, just sometimes, hope really does pay off. The story inevitably spread like wildfire. A tale of lost and found, of fate and honesty, it captured the public imagination. Reporters swarmed the beach town diner, eager for a soundbite from the miracle waitress. Regulars who had once barely noticed Maya beyond her ability to refill their coffee now claimed they always knew she was special, always saw a certain spark in her eyes. It was both amusing and a little irritating, but Maya handled it with grace, a quiet dignity that belied her years. The diner owner, a gruff but ultimately decent man, gave her a final paycheck along with a hefty finder's keeper's bonus. Legally, she probably couldn't accept it, but she did anyway, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. It was a symbolic gesture, a final nod to her past life, a past that was now definitively behind her. But what truly touched Maya, what truly resonated, were the letters. Hundreds of them. Strangers from all walks of life, from every corner of the country, began mailing her moon charms. Poems, faded photographs of their own lost children, long ago relatives, or simply stories of impossible reunions. Each letter was a testament to the universal human longing for connection, for closure, for a second chance. Maya, remembering how it felt to wait for a letter that never came, took the time to answer every single one. Her replies were heartfelt, empathetic, each word a small act of kindness, a recognition of shared humanity. She understood their pain, their hope, their desperate need to believe in miracles. David, a man of action and immense resources, wasn't content with merely reclaiming his daughter. He wanted to ensure that no other family suffered the same fate, that no other child was lost to bureaucratic error or negligence. With Maya's input, he launched the Halbrook Foundation for Displaced Children, a nonprofit dedicated to investigating and rectifying cases of children lost in the system due to clerical errors, fires, or fraudulent activities. He named Maya executive director. It was a bold move, and some of his business associates raised eyebrows, but David knew with an unshakable certainty that Maya possessed a unique blend of integrity, empathy, and lived experience that no MBA could teach. She understood the system from the inside out. She understood the ache of being lost. Their first official case fittingly mirrored Maya's own story in a poignant way. A young boy in foster care, barely 10 years old, had found a woman's purse filled with cash and credit cards. Despite his own difficult circumstances, he had promptly returned it, unasked, to the local police station. Maya and David flew out immediately. They met the boy, a shy, bright-eyed kid, and shook his hand, telling him how proud they were. They discovered his mother was struggling behind on rent and facing eviction. The foundation not only paid her overdue rent, but also set up a college fund for the boy, ensuring his honesty would be rewarded with opportunity, not just a pat on the head. Maya saw her younger self in his grateful grin, in the quiet dignity with which he accepted their help. And in that moment she knew the cycle was breaking. The pain of the past wasn't just a memory, It was a catalyst for change, a force for good. They were turning a tragedy into a legacy of hope, one child, one family at a time. A year later, life had settled into a rhythm, a beautiful, unexpected harmony. The Halbrook Foundation was thriving, making real differences in countless lives. Maya was flourishing, balancing her studies with her executive duties, her confidence growing with every challenge she met. David, visibly younger, happier, radiated a quiet contentment he hadn't known in decades. They took a new family picture, not in a stuffy studio, but on the deck of the Emily Rose David's beloved sailboat, now a symbol of new beginnings rather than lingering grief. It was a sunny, breezy afternoon, the kind that made you feel alive. David stood tall, his arm around Maya, who beamed radiant and at peace. The tiny silver moon charm, now polished and gleaming, had become a family heirloom passed around for the photo, each of them wearing it for a moment, a tangible link to their intertwined past and vibrant future. And because no family picture is complete without a furry four-legged member, there was the golden retriever they'd rescued, a goofy, lovable dog who, despite all evidence to the contrary, firmly believed he was a cat. He sat patiently, if somewhat confusedly, for the photo, adding a touch of warmth and humor to the tableau. David, ever sentimental, still kept both photos in his wallet. On one side, the faded 20-year-old image of baby Emily, a poignant reminder of what was lost. On the other, the new sunlit portrait of adult Maya, a vibrant testament to what was found. They were proof undeniable and heartwarming that time in its own mysterious way can indeed heal what it once stole, and sometimes it even gives back more than you could ever imagine. Smash! Like if you think honesty still matters, if you believe in the quiet power of doing the right thing, and share this with someone who needs reminded that kindness always circles back, sometimes in the most astonishing, life-altering ways. Maya's hands no longer shake when she pours coffee. In fact, she rarely pours coffee anymore, at least not professionally. She owns the diner now, having bought it from the old owner, with a fair offer from her own earnings and a small interest-bearing loan from David. She's renovated it, brightened it, and renamed it Second Moon, a playful nod to the charm that started it all. Every receipt carries a small, elegantly printed footnote. If you find something that isn't yours, return it. You never know whose life you might be returning. It's a simple message, a quiet testament to the profound truth she discovered. David watches her from the corner booth, a regular now, sipping his perfectly brewed, never-burnt coffee. His eyes shine with a deep, abiding pride, a contentment that radiates from him. His wallet is zipped tight, not just around credit cards and cash, but around two precious photographs and a story. A story that ends not with a period, but with an ellipsis, a continuing narrative that began with an act of simple honesty and unfolded into a miracle. So tell me, do you believe in coincidences? Or is the universe quietly stitching lost souls together, orchestrating reunions long before we even notice the first thread?